In this video, we will go over the modern format now that RCQ season is done and figure out what decks you should be playing and what decks you should possibly invest in the future that will be safe from bans. After a long RCQ season, I wanted to take a look at where the format has settled. Since the start of the season, we have had 3 new sets printed into the format, and one major card was in fact banned at the beginning of the season, which was Underworld Breach. So what are the best decks? What is their main plan? What deck would be a good investment for you to start with, be successful, and see the least chance of having an expensive card banned from your deck? It's difficult to talk about Modern after Modern Horizons 3 without bringing up Boros Energy. This deck would not exist without it, and in fact pretty much all of its core pieces were printed in MH3. A starting play of Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride alone will leave your opponent in a perpetual state of catching up. Then if you have managed to deal with this first wave, the deck follows up with Ajani and Goblin Bombardment. At that point, they can sack the cat token made from the front side of Ajani to flip Ajani to its Planeswalker's side. Add the fact that Galvanic Discharge is able to utilize the energy generated by other creatures entering the battlefield, while Guide of Souls is in play, and it makes for a very potent strategy. The deck has recently added Voice of Victory as a way of denying your opponents the ability to interact at instant speed, while the attack trigger of putting 2 red 1/1s into play creates red permanents for Ajani. If Bombardment is on the battlefield, this also essentially means you can hit for 4 each turn with the tokens. Should also be noted there has been a pretty successful build of energy that dips its toe into Mardu to play Sephiroth, Fabled Soldier, which gives you another payoff for Goblin Bombardment and Ocelot Pride Cat tokens. Primeval Titan decks have been a staple of the modern format for as long as the format has existed, thanks to pro players and influencers such as Canister working hard on other lines the deck can have. A new combo was found in the last year with Aftermath Analyst, Shifting Woodland, Lotus Field, Mirror Pool, Vesuva, and so on and so forth. You can have infinite mana, infinite tokens, and just Titans entering with the classic Haste and Double Strike is good enough to do the job. This deck really takes advantage of lands. Urza Saga, a powerhouse in the format since it's printing in Modern Horizons 2, lets you either stall with tokens or even use them as your main plan of attack if need be. Saga's final chapter lets you find Amulet of Vigor, which almost single-handedly makes the deck go. Once you start looping Lotus Fields with Aftermath Analyst and Shifting Woodland, you can bounce all of the opponent's non-land permanents with Otawara Soaring City and blowing up opponent's lands with Boseiju Who Endures. Teleria West plays a key role in finding Summoner's Pact to find your Primeval Titans. If you have the Mirror Pool in play during your Aftermath Analyst loops, you can create infinite copies of Primeval Titan while giving them haste with Hanwar Battlements. As long as Amulet of Vigor and Primeval Titan are in the format, Amulet Titan will continue to be a force. The difficulty of playing the deck has kept its numbers down, which has created a situation where the deck is probably underrepresented in the meta overall. Most would agree that Amulet Titan is still one of the best decks in the format. Before Psychic Frog, Izzet was the flavor most Murktide lists preferred. However, it's hard to deny how impactful Psychic Frog has been to Magic since its printing, including getting banned in Legacy for being the best discard outlet ever printed. At this point, besides a few Izzet Wizards players, tempo enthusiasts have shifted to Dimir tempo piles that include Psychic Frog, Murktide Regent, Preordain, which is somewhat recent in terms of its unbanning, and a suite of counterspells that will frustrate any opponent into possibly conceding. Recent additions such as Abhorrent Oculus have made the list consider being more of a reanimate shell as of late, playing cards such as Unearth to quickly get Abhorrent Oculus out of the graveyard in a cheap way. And some lists have even gone as far as to just go into a full Reanimator shell playing Persist as well as Archon of Cruelty, simply because you have an easy sack or easy discard outlet, specifically Psychic Frog, and you can cheaply rely on Abhorrent Oculus when you can't find your Archon of Cruelty. These Dimir lists will continue to be a mainstay in the format and will probably not see any bans in the future, while being a list that can really adapt as metagames change. I am lumping most Eldrazi decks such as Tron, Ramp, Harrogast, and Aggro here. As you can tell on the channel, I tend to play a plethora of Eldrazi lists, and it also is a favorite by other players in our metas. This isn't surprising, as Eldrazi Ramp has been a mainstay even after the One Ring was banned from the format last year. Utopia Sprawl, Talismans, Malevolent Rumble, and Sowing Mycospawn have really allowed the player to accelerate to the bigger threats of Emrakul the Promise End, Ugin Eye of the Storms, which was recently printed, and of course, Sire of Seven Deaths. Aggro, focusing on hitting hard and fast with the likes of Eldrazi Linebreaker, Glaring Fleshraker, and the best common to be printed in a while, Writhing Chrysalis, is a strategy that sometimes runs copies of It That Heralds the End, which pumps your team and makes your 7-drops come down a turn earlier. Landing Sire 7 Deaths here tends to close the door on most of the matchups it faces. Sire 7 Deaths does an incredible job of stabilizing the game, having lifelink and Ward 7 pay 7 life, making it a card that is generally better than former All-Star of the deck, or of other Tron variants, Wormcoil Engine. Honestly, the surprise of the group has been the rise of Monogreen Tron. At times this has been more of an Eldrazi list, but it's gone closer to more of its old form of Green Tron thanks to the printing of Tezzeret Cruel Captain. This has allowed the list to focus more heavily on 1-drop artifacts, including hate pieces that Tezzeret can tutor up as needed. Heck, even Karn Liberated has made a comeback in the list after a long absence. All that has to be relied on here for the win are large robots off of Tezzeret, or finding Walking Ballista off Karn the Great Creator, and even Ugin Eye of the Storms will shut the door for you. It should be noted that all Eldrazi lists and Tron variants are running one specific card from Modern Horizons 3, and that is in fact Kozilek's Command. Easily one of the best removal and dig pieces ever printed, and even is graveyard hate. Arguably the best command, and arguably the best card to be printed out of Modern Horizons 3, and could even be argued as the best card in Modern currently. Blink has gone from one of the best decks when Underworld Breach on the format, to not putting up any results, to then clawing its way back up from obscurity simply because of the value it has been able to create off of Blink effects, mainly Ephemerate. The deck mostly relies on 4 cards: Phalia, Overlord of the Baelmark, Solitude, and Ephemerate. Once Ketramos was printed, the deck leaned either all in to take advantage of Ketramos' card draw, and quickly exiling as many cards as needed to turn it on as a creature and gain back the life lost, or relied mostly on being the value engine that it saw playing Aether Vial. Then we really saw the list start to embrace being an Esper deck, once again playing one of the best cards in the format in Psychic Frog as a quick way to exile cards from the graveyard to draw off of Ketramos, while feeding the Ketramos as well. And of course, Psychic Frog being a very versatile threat you have to deal with when it hits the board. As of late, we have seen recently printed Quantum Riddler become a mainstay as a large threat that can be essentially scammed, quote-unquote, onto the board for 3 mana, including Ephemerate. And we're even seeing some Azorius Blink lists pop up recently, taking advantage of Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride, and then some other recently printed cards here in Darfield Shepherd, which you can warp for 2 to get a Plains card or a creature card with mana value 1 or less into your hand. And these effects are very effective of taking advantage of Ephemerate. Needless to say, Blink is still a list that has plenty of room for innovation and will be a mainstay in the format for sets to come. 5 Colors of Pain for the opponent. Domain Zoo has consistently been one of the best decks at adapting to what the format has thrown at it. Leyline Binding, Leyline of the Guild Pact, and Scion of Draco are a crucial set of vertebrae for the backbone of this deck. Of course, Leyline of the Guild Pact fixes your mana, making all of your permanents every color, and your lands every land type. This essentially makes Leyline Binding a 1-mana removal spell with Flash, and when Guild Pact is combined with Scion of Draco, all your creatures gain hexproof. Its most recent additions have been cards such as Flage, Titan's Fury, and Arena of Glory, which has pushed the deck's explosiveness to a point where certain hands feel unbeatable. Oddly, the card that the deck has had the hardest time finding a replacement for is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Fable was a card that was winning tournaments left and right over multiple formats. However, the card advantage, while needed, seems to be lacking in comparison to other decks. Make sure to keep your Doorkeeper Thralls in the deck, as well as it really helps with a bunch of the matchups in the meta such as the Orzhov Blink Lists. In reality, it also just helps against every other deck in the format that relies on Enter the Battlefield triggers, because more cards in the format replace themselves in more ways, and while Eldrazi tends to be one that relies on cast triggers, most of the other decks in the format are very reliant on Enter the Battlefield triggers. Of course, the deck runs Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, which is one of the best 1-drops ever printed, but a card that has really fallen out of favor in the modern format. Though here it's really hard to argue with the value that the card provides, given that it makes a treasure token, and if you haven't managed to land one of your explosive hands that has Leyline of the Guild Pact, this really helps you A, have the mana ramp to get to your larger spells, and B, help with your fixing, as you are in fact a 5-color deck. Add the fact that you can mainboard Consign to Memory, which helps in your Eldrazi matchups and also lets you counter your trigger of your Flage to keep it on the battlefield. You really have an opportunity to be one of the strongest decks in the format. It was tempting to include this deck with the Eldrazi section of the video. However, it really is a different deck compared to the other lists that run Eldrazi. The point of the list is to have Basking Broodscale, Blade of the Bloodchief, and either an Eldrazi spawn to sack to start the combo, or enough mana to adapt the Broodscale, creating a spawn and starting the infinite mana loop, which also makes an infinitely large Broodscale. Granted, at that point you would need to attack with the Broodscale, which is not feasible usually. So use the mana generated to cast Glaring Fleshraker, Kozilek's Command, Walking Ballista, or Emrakul the Promise End to finish the game off. There are 3 different versions of the deck currently. The first is the most popular, in Gruul Broodscale, which has the red splash for Writhing Chrysalis, and then Fire Spout or Pyroclasm out of the board. These sweepers really help into the Boros Energy matchup, and Writhing Chrysalis is a great blocker and threat in the meta. Next is Mono Green Broodscale. A lot of the same things are true here, but your mana is more consistent with the likes of Delighted Halfling, and, if the deck is trying to have more of a mid-game plan, Sowing Mycospawn. There also is a Golgari version of the deck that is similar to the Mono Green version. However, this list gets to enjoy the likes of recently printed Sephiroth Fabled Soldier, which is a lethal card to go with Kozilek's Command. This also gives you another win condition when Broodscale combo is on the line almost incidentally. This is a spot where you should definitely value your Kozilek's commands. Kozilek Command is in fact one of the best cards in this deck, if not the best card in this deck. It searches for one of your combo pieces, it searches for your win conditions. It sometimes is your win condition. It is easily the backbone of this deck in terms of keeping your game plan together. Prowess is essentially the burn deck of the format, even though burn does in fact still exist. Prowess takes advantage of creatures with the Prowess keywords such as Slickshot Showoff and Monastery Swiftspear. Dragon Rage's Channeler is an honorary Prowess creature to take advantage of playing Mishra's Bauble for delirium purposes and to churn through your deck. The card that has made the deck a tour de force, however, is Kori Steelcutter. Kori Steelcutter rewards you for playing 2 spells a turn with a 1/1 monk that has Prowess and then attaches itself to said monk. That monk then has haste and trample, which combined with spells such as mutagenic growth and violent outburst, and even the versatility of lava dart, it creates a lethal attack on the regular. One underrated aspect of this deck is how well it goes wide when unchecked. Finding a second Kori is pretty common thanks to the card selection of Preordain and Expressive Iteration. And of course, being that this is in fact a blue deck, it can run a very versatile suite of answers, both out of the sideboard and main board. Obviously it does in fact play Lightning Bolt, but Consign to Memory is in the board, and Spell Snare is a very happy inclusion to most sideboards of this deck. Another effective deck in this format has been Goblin Charbelcher lists, maximizing the fact that WotC has printed so many MDFCs the past decade. This deck kills the opponent with activating Goblin Charbelcher, while mostly being a blue deck that can play good counter magic such as Force of Negation, Flare of Denial, and Disrupting Shoal. To build up to your combo and find your pieces, Lotus Bloom is played here, as well as Tamashii, Reality Architect. These two cards together help you find your Goblin Charbelcher, and of course, Whir of Invention, a long-time loved card that sees a lot of play here, being able to find Goblin Charbelcher as well. Being as this deck mostly relies on Lotus Bloom, you get to play Harbinger of the Seas out of the board as a proactive threat, both minimizing your damage you take off of some of your MDFCs to come in untapped, as well as disrupting a lot of your opponents and their mana-hungry decks, as we have mentioned between Eldrazi and Domain Zoo, for instance. And with all blue decks, you get access to Consign to Memory, being the most important counterspell in the format. Since Mox Opal's unbanning, we saw it really be a terror and a key acceleration piece for Underworld Breach. However, since Breach's ban, it has continued to be a format staple since, and was a format staple before it was banned. There are multiple decks that are powered by Mox Opal. Affinity is a classic archetype of the format that has seen a few different forms at this point. The two that have really proven themselves so far are Izzet and Azorius. Izzet lists take advantage of Pinnacle Emissary from Edge of Eternities. Its 1-mana warp ability makes following up with cheap artifacts a viable route, and considering these 1/1 drones have flying, they really take over the game quickly, especially if you're able to get 3 to 4 out there on turn 1. And of course, this lets you play Thoughtcast, which then is just a 1-mana spell, and you probably have a Mox Opal on the battlefield already, being able to tap that for blue mana to refill your hand after dumping it on turn 1. Thought Monitor plays a role as well, Metallic Rebuke being a key piece to reacting to what your opponents are doing while only having to keep up minimal mana. And last but certainly not least is Kappa Cannoneer, which can be easily cast on turn 2 to 3 and being a threat that the opponent has a very difficult time to deal with. And with Pinnacle Emissary, when you play artifacts, it gains 2 counters, and every time it gains a counter, it becomes unblockable. Of course, all versions of Affinity take advantage of playing Emry, Lurker of the Lock, letting you replay key pieces, and even replaying large creatures such as Kappa Cannoneer once it's been removed from the battlefield. Another Opal deck that has been seeing play is Vivi Corey Steelcutter lists. Vivi was just printed in Final Fantasy and is an easy closer for the deck thanks to the ping ability and the possible mana generation with the counters gained from the pseudo Prowess ability. Corey Steelcutter is a perfect artifact to pair with Emry and your cheap artifact spells. And of course, this deck gets to play Tamiyo as well, which flips off of Thoughtcast, which draws 2 cards, and you have already drawn a card for turn, and in that case you have a 1-mana Planeswalker. Tamiyo and Emry playing a key role in turning on Mox Amber in these lists. Some honorable mention decks for you to consider. Blue-White Control, as much as most of us groan at the sound of that deck, is still in a very good position considering the counterspells that have been printed into the format, and on top of that has powerful planeswalkers that still wreak havoc when left unchecked. Another deck that I love that tends to put up results on the occasional MTGO challenge or even in paper recently is the Food Combo deck, taking advantage of course of Cauldron Familiar, Samwise Gamgee, and a free sack outlet, is a powerful combo that can be achieved with Birthing Ritual or with Chord of Calling, and sometimes even see splashes of Green Sun Zenith, though that card has in fact seen less play in the food list, simply because it cannot find Cauldron Familiar. Speaking of Birthing Ritual decks, Simic Value is a deck that has put up results as of late as well, getting to play old classics from MH1, which is weird to say, Icefang Quaddle, as well as Fibblethip the Lost, which hasn't seen modern play really ever. And this deck, of course, really takes advantage of Abhorrent Oculus and Birthing Ritual into it, as well as Shardless Agent being able to get more value. Of course, Ruby Storm, a slight mention here, when ignored, can win any tournament. And of course, every time the format forgets about Graveyard Hate, Mill makes another appearance and takes down a tournament. 2 final shoutouts, one specifically for Goryo's Vengeance and Living End, 2 decks that have in fact been explosive decks and will continue to be explosive decks. Goryo's Vengeance getting to play Atraxa Grand Unifier, which creates a ton of value for the deck, as well as, you guessed it, Psychic Frog, one of the best cards in the format, while getting to play Endurance and Subtlety as key pieces of interaction, including Force of Negation. The deck really just wants to cast Ardent Plea and Shardless Agent, 2 very key Cascade cards, not playing any cards under the CMC of 3 other than Living End, to guarantee finding Living End and putting all the creatures you cycled away, or cards that left the battlefield, back onto the battlefield to create an enormous advantage. And one final inclusion, we will in fact mention the Allosaurus Rider combo decks. While being the most explosive deck in the format, in that it can possibly win on turn 1, the deck is in fact better simply because it's adopted some more pieces that it hadn't before. This includes Consign to Memory, and funny enough, Galta Stampede Tyrant. So keep a lookout for these decks in the format moving forward. So what deck would I play in Modern currently if I was planning on my deck lasting as long as possible while also being a decent entry point and not expecting a card to be banned out of my deck very soon? I think ultimately it comes down to what your playstyle is, but it's really hard to ignore Dimir Tempoliss as a deck that is easy for people to get in on, as well as a deck that will rarely have a single piece banned out of it thanks to the power level of the other decks in the format. Maybe Psychic Frog sees the axe at some point, but it's not the most expensive card to possibly see a ban. Tron will be a deck that you can always play, and getting into Eldrazi is a viable option for Tron lists. And as long as Consign to Memory is still in the format, Eldrazi is an option that is definitely worth thinking about, because Consign to Memory keeps this deck in check, which means you're less likely to have your deck banned. And finally, if you're willing to put in the time, Amulet Titan is a deck that is worth putting investment into simply because you can win any tournament, and on top of that, very few of your cards will ever be options for Wizards of the Coast to put the banhammer on. Amulet of Vigor, Primeval Titan, cards that have lasted through multiple formats of Modern and continue to stand the test of time. And that is why I would recommend these decks as decks to pick up in the Modern format. Of course, in the comments below, let us know what your favorite deck is, what deck you would invest in, and what cards you would think will face the banhammer in the future. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week.